Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Taiwan Pride webinar. I am David Ling, a current student of INSEAD's MBA programs. It's very exciting to see we have lots of participants calling in from different parts of the world. Thank you very much for joining us today. Before we get started, there are three housekeeping items I would like to bring to your attention. Just a second. Okay, perfect. First, please mute yourself during the whole event. Later of the event, we might invite you to unmute yourself and to interact with Audrey directly, but except for that, please make sure you are muted. And secondly, please submit your questions using Slido. As you can see, there are Slido information on your screen. And we are also welcome new questions coming in during the whole event. And finally, because this webinar will be recorded and shared in public, please make sure don't submit questions contain confidential information. Okay. Okay. Let me get back to the main slides. I believe you are as excited as I am because our guest today is very special. She studied programming at the age of 8, and she started her company in Silicon Valley before 2020. And now she is the Taiwan's youngest and first ever transgender minister. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you, Audrey.
Hello, good local time, everyone. Really happy to be here.
Thank you very much. So I believe the 2021 has been a very busy year for you because I know you spent a lot of time protecting Taiwan from the pandemic, and we also saw that you representing Taiwan on many international occasions, such as I remember last December, you represented Taiwanese government to attend U.S. President Biden's Democracy for Summit.
Right.
And before we jump into participants' questions, would you mind sharing what are you busy with recently, and what are you or your team's the New Year's objectives for 2022?
Certainly. So our work has been always to do digital democracy by not asking people to trust the government, but asking the government to trust its people. And we've seen that in the past couple of years, this model, this social innovation model, where everyone's business is co-created with everyone, works well for structural issues. For example, the pandemic, the infodemic, and things like that. And so currently, I'm working on not just the usual contact tracing vaccination platform stuff, which is already well established that citizen science is really good at creating such platforms, but also taking this model and applying it to upcoming challenges. For example, we're planning the presidential hackathon this year, which is our annual event. But this year, we're going to focus domestically on the sustainable kind of cohabitat design, and also internationally focus on climate entrepreneurship. Now, these two things are also things that require coordinated action, and without any, grassroots civic tech movement, I don't think that these issues could be addressed comfortably, and they share the same structure as the pandemic and the infodemic. So I would say that my main goal for this year is just to take the Taiwan model that worked well for some issues and then applying to work on more issues.
Very impressive. Thank you very much. Even I am now in France, I'm not in Taiwan, but from my friends in Taiwan, I can also feel like that. The entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial spirit in Taiwan is growing as a very fast pace, and really looking forward to it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I believe many of the participants are already inspired by you, but we have already prepared lots of questions. So now let's check those questions.
Okay, 26 to be precise.
Yes.
So do you see the questions? Should I just project it as my screen and you can pin my screen? Would that arrangement work for you, or would you prefer some other arrangement?
I think I see your screen now. Is everybody see Audrey's screen? It's okay? No?
No?
Okay, let me see.
Okay, it's part of my camera. So it's part of my video. So if you pin me or something, I believe that should.
David, I pinned Audrey already.
Now I think Katrina is saying that now it's working.
It works?
Does it work now?
I don't have to do anything? Okay, good. Yeah. All right. Right. So thank you for the great questions. And we're a little bit time bound, right? We have like 50 minutes or so with 36 questions. That means what, 2 minutes per question, which is not going to work. So I would rely on your voting. That is to say, if you go to Slido, scan the QR code, or type in slido.com with the code, you can vote on each other's questions, and the questions with the most number of votes will dominate, right, the screen. And I'll be spending more time on these. And if the questions don't have the required number of votes, I'll read them all, but I make no commitment that I will answer them all. And please feel free to keep the questions coming. I understand that on Zoom, if people want to unmute themselves, just let the moderator know or raise their hand or something. And if you want to just speak, don't wait for me to finish answering questions, because that would be the end of this hour. So at any given time, if you want to say anything, just let the moderator know, unmute and say it. And I prefer a more lively, interactive interaction, if that's okay with you. All right, so if that's okay, let's get started. So 9 people would like to know, which has tripled its votes. So thank you for actually voting. 9 people would like to know, what are your opinions on the use of artificial intelligence in the public sector, and what are you excited or concerned about that? Well, for me, AI in public sector means assistive intelligence. Indeed, assistive technology is something that we're all used to. I mean, I have this eyeglass, which is pretty assistive technology, if you ask me, and it's transparent. Not just metaphorically, it's actually transparent in a sense that it helps me to see you better. It doesn't try to push advertisement that requires 30 seconds to close. It doesn't serve anyone else's interest. It empowers me. So that's assistive. And also it is accountable. When it breaks, when it has bias, meaning it gets blurry or something, I get to fix it myself or take it to the repair person down the street. I don't have to spend 10 years to reverse engineer the black box. I don't have to pay tens of millions of dollars in license fees, which means that when there's bias, and there will be bias detected by the people who are being assisted, they are fully empowered to make an informed correction right there, right? So I believe we should treat AI exactly the same way as we treat any other assistive technology, and demand the same accountability and transparency to it. So in concrete terms, it means that in Taiwan, we fund assistive intelligence. We ask how quickly can the bias be corrected? Is there a feedback mechanism? How explainable is it? And we actually prefer to use the previous centuries machine learning, that is to say not deep learning, but very shallow learning in many public sector efforts, because it's much easier to explain and much easier to replicate. But it doesn't mean that we're averse to deep learning. It just is held to the same standard as any assistive technology. And the concern, of course, is that if we don't do that, then basically it results in centralization of data, where people, instead of actively contributing to a data collaborative or data coalition, people are just being passively gathered the data, and the addiction via any other engagement design in the name of personalization will end in de facto centralization of state control or multinational corporation control and things like that. And once the habit forms, it's actually very difficult to unlearn those habits, which is why in primary schools, in basic education, we always prefer open source, open data, open API. And when people want to work on machine learning projects, we ensure that they can do so by inspecting the model much as they can inspect a scratch program and remix it. They can also freely do so with the support of our National Center for High-Speed Computation and so on. So again, just think of it like the eyeglass or fire. We certainly don't ban fire, but we do require teaching responsible use of fire at a very early age, namely cooking classes with open recipes. So that's my initial answer. If people want to ask follow-up questions, please do, because I have no idea how deeply should I get into each topic. And so if you want to follow up, please just do so by raising your hand or unmuting yourself.
Yeah, I believe it is kind of like a broad question, but now everyone has the you are enabled to like unmute yourself. So if you have questions,
okay. Okay, well, then you can just post your newest question on Slido, and I will also monitor the latest question part. So I think that's okay. All right, so 10 people would like to know, is the PRC, China, currently waging an extensive cyber war on Taiwan? And how do you respond to the threat in your position? So the thing is that what we're looking at is not in technical terms, a war with a declaration, with an end and things like that, more like information manipulation operations and things like that. And it's difficult to say where does the battlefield begin and where does the battlefield end, because it's in multiple strata in the conversation. I'll use one example. For example, before our presidential election in 2020, in 2019, I think November, there was suddenly a very viral message on our social media here that says, and I quote, the Hong Kong protesters, the teenagers, are being paid $20 million to murder a police, end of quote. And it was a very scary looking photo. And now, is that a cyber war? Is that even warfare? It's very difficult to say. But the strategic aim of that message is very simple. It's trying to undermine the people's idea of people fighting for democracy. It's trying to undermine democratic protest or any institutions that support these protests and so on. It's undermining people's idea that peaceful demonstration can effect changes and so on. So in Taiwan, we don't take down things. Otherwise, we become more authoritarian, right? We don't take down things from the administration. We instead relying on people to flag things as spam. We've got a lot of startups like Whoscall and established cybersecurity company like Trend Micro that has the capability of essentially looking at the flag as spam instant messages and then check which ones have a highest basic reproduction number, have a higher R rate. We don't assign Greek letters to those, but anyway, basically the idea is that the virus of the mind can be countered pretty much the same way that we counter the virus of the body, which means that once we detect the highest reproducing variants, like the message I just shown, then we do contact tracing. So the Taiwan Fact Check Center, for example, an independent organization, traced the origin of that caption to the Weibo account of the Zhongyang Zhenfa Chang'an Jian, the Chang'an Sword account of the Communist in China party and the legal and political unit. But the photo was from Reuters. So basically, it's a kind of a mutation that took this very scary looking, but actually Reuters' original caption was just that there were young people in Hong Kong protesting, right? And then with a alternate caption, an alternate frame. And so the way that we deactivate that is making kind of inoculations of the mind. People, when they look at the share of that message on social media, we work with the social media company and so on. So there's this kind of mandatory labeling that says this message is sponsored by the Chinese Communist Party. Well, it doesn't say that. It says that it's been fact-checked as basically interfered with by the Taiwan Fact Check Center. And so the great thing about this is that it's not taking anything down. but it turns a kind of potentially toxic virus into a less toxic and potentially inoculating vaccine, and something that the nature is doing, I think, with the biological virus nowadays. So the point I'm making is that once a sufficient amount of people see this, what we call notice and public notice, they build antibodies in their mind. They understand that there's information manipulation going on. And not only do they refrain from sharing blindly the original scary looking message, but they actually participate in the fact checking themselves. And this is how exactly that we counter the infodemic or information manipulation on multiple levels. So that's just one anecdote, but there's a multi-level response to build integrity in the counting of the elections by making sure YouTubers can just film the counting from different parties that agree on the result, or having the middle schoolers fact check the 3 presidential candidates during their debates in real time, and things like that. So it's a multi-pronged approach. I hope that answers the question. It's a very broad question, so I'll just answer it kind of abstractly. So if that's okay with you, I'll just go on. All right. So 8 people would like to know, as quantifying ROI for digital initiatives is extremely difficult, is it? How do you present a case for investments in digital in a cost-conscious public sector? It's not difficult to quantify if you focus on time saved and risk reduced. These two are easily quantifiable. If you quantify it by profits, then of course, because public sector doesn't really have a profit motive, it will of course be difficult to put a dollar amount on the digitalization and the transformation. But the public sector, like any other organization, spends tons of time explaining the same thing to people and answering frequently asked questions, trying to provide service to people with different needs. But those different needs sometimes compete for limited resources, certainly of time, right, of the public servants and so on. So if we say that the digital is here just to save time and reduce risk, mostly risk of lack of communication, then that is easily agreed upon and easily quantifiable. It's not a huge amount. It's not billions of dollars. But actually, when we introduced the idea of free software in the commercial world, call it open source, it's exactly the same strategy. We're not saying that open source is going to make your shareholders tons of money. What we're saying is that you're maintaining your software in 10 different platforms that costs a lot of money, but we can save that if you manage that with the community, or you have to do cybersecurity audits, penetration testing. That's a lot of efforts. But if you pull your resources together in a shared infrastructure and open up that code, then all the white hat hackers work together and you save the time on audit and save the risk as well, and so on and so on. So basically, each and every argument that we used to make a business case for open source can also be used for open government and digital transformation based on open government principles. And I think that works extra well in the public sector, because after all, we're not going to start voting by share, right? We're still voting by each person vote. And if you reduce the time for everyone to access public service and get their opinions heard, and if you reduce the risk for everyone to avoid misunderstanding, so we can actually co-create on something, that's probably good enough on the democratic society, because that's going to win your votes. And that's a very easy case to make to mayors and presidents of the liberal democracies. Of course, if you're in a non-democratic polity, that probably doesn't work. But I'm fortunate enough that I'm working now in a democratic polity and making sure that it keeps it this way. All right, so if that's okay, I'll just go on. 7 people would like to know, what difficulties have you faced as a transgender public figure? Yeah, this is the pride conversation after all. So finally, we have something that joins the topic. And how have you conquered, and are you conquering them? I'm happy to report that I've not faced any discrimination whatsoever in my career in the public service for the past 6 years or so. And it's a testament to Taiwan. Basically, we've already had very good gender mainstreaming work. More than 40% of parliamentarians are women. Our president, 100% women for quite some time now. So basically, we're building upon the victories that's already had and indeed mainstreamed by the feminist for the women's equality movement since the turn of century. I think that's when it became part of the public sector policies, and now it's just everywhere. So I think building upon those ideas, what my message is mainly is that it's not about exclusionary identity, like I'm different from half the population, and then later on different from the other half of the population, but rather a shared experience. So I would say I had a puberty when I was 13, and I had another puberty when I was 24, and it's easy to understand this way, right? I share common experience with some people, and then I share common experience with some other people, but it doesn't mean that my identity changed from this to that. It means that I'm able to share more common experience with people, and when phrased this way, mostly people in Taiwan is happy with this frame, and so which is why if you look at my Twitter account, it says that my pronoun is */*, which just means like whatever, right? So I can't be offended. And so this is not exactly conquering them, because it's not a conqueror's mindset. It is mostly making sure that people get intuitively this idea of intersectionality, where the vulnerable experience that we have is actually a blessing, because that enables us, when we're in a more privileged position, to empathize well with people with common experience, but with their own vulnerabilities and different positions and so on. So common values based on different positions is my main message, and that is the result of my own gender transition experiences that enable me to build empathy with more people. Indeed, the whole Homo sapiens community is probably the community that I consider myself belong to now. So hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so actually
yes.
the question was from me. And I believe like empathy was very important, but like what I submit this question is that I was working in Japan, and during that time, my friends around me, they are like, we really envy Taiwan. The environment was more like open, but like probably in Japan, they are more like a conservative attitude toward this kind of like the topic. So I receive a lot of questions like how do you what if you are put into like a more severe or more conservative environment? How do you deal with the difficulties?
I think Japan is more like Taiwan when I was a teenager or so, right? I mean, in the degree of understanding, acceptance, and so on. And around that time, I believe the Taiwanese gender equality, the rights people, I think they deliberately turned to culture, to art, to pop music, especially because Taiwan pop music was at its height around that time. And so people associated like pride or being gay as literally like being proud of and being happy, right? Which is the other meaning of these English words. And so it builds a very positive association with the LGBTIQ experiences. And I believe that's also what the Japanese people are turning toward nowadays. And I think a book was just about to publish that cites our experience in Taiwan as kind of a handbook, a playbook, so to speak, for the Japanese activists. So my suggestion would be, if you're in Japan and so on, get into those communities. And also the Taiwanese experience is, I think, being very well received in Japan right now. It's generally accelerating in the acceptance and so on. So for example, one of the messages I always share is that when we legalize marriage equality, we made sure that it's done in an intergenerational fashion. fashion, in the sense that the older people in Japan, like older people in Taiwan, believe that family to family relationship is what marriage is about, and the two newlywed persons are just kind of representatives of the two families. It's a kind of in-law based view on marriage, right? Father-in-law, mother-in-law. But in the after the turn of century, gradually by 2008, I believe, Taiwan switched to marriage by registration only, which means that it's now between an individual and another individual. But we can't go back in time and change everyone who married by family ceremony before 2007. It just doesn't work like that. It's their shared experience. It's a real experience, which is why when we legalize marriage equality in Taiwan, we use what we call a hyperlink act to make sure that when two same-sex persons wed, only they as individuals wed, but their families don't. So they don't form kinship in-law relationship with the other family. And this is what I call 结婚不结姻 in Mandarin, or marrying just the bylaws but not the in-laws. And that shows a respect and a conversation based on common experiences. And I think that strategy also probably works in Japan and in many other places as well.
Thanks, Audrey.
Cool. So let's move on then. All right. So there are 8 people asking, what positive changes have you seen in Taiwan since you became the first transgender minister in the world, I believe? I always add first openly transgender minister, because for all I know, everybody else may be transgender too, just not open about it. But anyway, so do you think the success can be applied to other countries? Yes and no. I think the positive changes already happened in Taiwan, and that's what allowed me to become a minister at this stage. So in many sense, I'm a kind of lagging indicator. It's not that I became the transgender minister and then Taiwanese people suddenly woke up to LGBTIQ rights. It's not like that. It is that we're just already about to legalize marriage equality, that the gay pride is, and now transgender pride is the largest in the world, established many years ago, right? So I can't claim credit for any of that. But I think, so that's the no part. But the yes part, yes, I do believe that the message that I send around, for example, Japanese media, I think one of them just published, asked me about how do I convince people in my office to kind of remodel the restrooms to allow for gender neutral restrooms, which is a very practical question, right? And then I share with them the gender mainstreaming work, the Gender Equality Committee. 14 years ago, the Ministry of Interior already worked on recommendations many years ago, and we just follow their guidelines. So in my office in the Social Innovation Lab, on the ground floor, there's the ladies' room, there's the gentlemen's room, there's a gender neutral room, and there's also a room for wheelchair access, and so on. But the thing is that I didn't make those guidelines, I just implemented those guidelines, and the guidelines are already there, but without my international exposure. I don't think that any other minister in Taiwan will be asked that question. So basically, my contribution to other countries is to introduce the decades of gender mainstreaming work and inclusion work that Taiwan has already accomplished. In that, maybe it's part of the Taiwan model. I'm happy to, I guess, be the literally Taiwan model, like posing for wearing fashionable clothes and so on. but in the end, it's just a messenger. And the message is that Taiwan has already worked it out, and so can you. Yeah. All right. So 8 people would like to know, what is your favorite Taiwan tea? There is only one answer, and that answer is bubble tea. So I actually made a pretty trending Twitter video explaining that digital and democracy are like bubble and tea, and how they work together in a kind of open innovation. And it doesn't really matter what kind of tea. It could be Hongcha, the black tea. It could be Rooibos, the red tea, and so on, right? Every different polity has its own kind of plural institutions already well established in the society. So I don't think that digital can be just added to that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be bubble tea. It would probably instant noodle or something. So, but by making sure sure that the real-time feedback is there, that open innovation there, open recipes there, bubble added to the tea, made tea relevant again to a generation of very young people and to people who are very eager to share their recipes and so on, made tea cool again, basically. And that's what digital is doing to democracy. So feel free to watch that Twitter video of bubble tea, digital democracy for more information on the bubble tea front. Thank you for the question. All right. Now, 7 people would like to know, how do current increasing political tensions with the PRC, with China, affect your thoughts about and preparations for the future? I think the political tension was always there. But I think in the past couple of years, it's becoming more and more apparent that the main message that we're saying, basically deepening democracy, helps fighting off the pandemic with no lockdown and the infodemic with no takedown, isn't very well received with the other alternative that you have to resort to a hyper-authoritarian digital surveillance society in order to counter the pandemic and infodemic. So these two messages, it's really difficult to reconcile, which means probably, yes, there is some additional tension because of those two narratives going around. So how it affects my preparations for the future? Well, first of all, we need to apply digital democracy to even more complex issues, right? To show that it's not just for these few specific issues, but rather is a general model that can work for all democratic, liberally democratic polities. That's certainly my plan. And the second plan is also to be open to the possibility that people within PRC, maybe they have read Dr. Li Wenliang's story. Maybe they know that thanks to a budding civic space in a digital stage, Dr. Li Wenliang did save the Taiwanese people because the PTT shared his message and triaged it and resulted in early preventative measures that Taiwan took on the first day of 2020. And comparatively, the so-called the PRC model of authoritarianism harmonized Dr. Li Wenliang in Wuhan and took away his freedom of speech, and that made his message, which could have saved the Wuhan people, didn't, right? So things like that, and the response from the PRC citizens encourages me in that they also see that their narrative, as grand as it is, may not actually portray the facts very well when it comes to real-time understanding, keeping a tab on what's actually happening on the ground. With no freedom of speech or journalism and so on, it's really difficult to tell what exactly happens. And so some of them are also reflecting on this, and it's on this shared observation that I believe there's also some chances for dialogue in applying some of the lessons that we have learned to the people who previously believed the more authoritarian narratives. I hope that answered the question. All right. Some of you would like to know, can Taiwan become a startup nation? Certainly with your help. What would be required in order to do so? We've done plenty. If you look for the Gold Card program, for example, for startup founders and people who are eager to work in startup, the program worked really well even during the pandemic, where usually the tourist and business visits to Taiwan physically are kind of, I wouldn't say decimated because it's 90%, but it's actually 9%. But anyway, so it's much reduced. And then, but people who want to come to Taiwan to work on their startup idea and applied for the Gold Card actually increased, I think, more than tenfold during the pandemic compared to before the pandemic. And it shows that our new Gold Card oriented design of working with people who we don't say like brain drain anymore, with the talent circulation. So people who have spent some time in other startup cultures, they can bring entire teams back to Taiwan to work on their startup ideas. We've adjusted our laws, our regulations, and so on to make it really friendly to them. And we also are now having a much more healthy relationship in the public sector when it comes to procurement of new ideas from especially social entrepreneurs, but broadly speaking, all startups as well. As I mentioned, the main counter-pandemic measures, the most task, rationing visualization, the contact tracing methods, and so on, the initial vaccination arrangement dashboard, and so on. All these were products and services by the social entrepreneurs in the startup scene, by usually people in their early 30s and so on, and many with the help with the international social entrepreneurship fellows. So I think that's really made a difference, and people really think that we need to stay agile in the public sector and engage more with the social entrepreneurs and startup people in order to, as I mentioned, tackle those ideas. And that's why the president gives 5 awards to those entrepreneurs, 5 teams, right? Promising that whatever they did in the past 3 months, it will be massively accelerated by the president herself in the next fiscal year, promising the budgetary, the personnel, the regulatory support they need to achieve telemedicine or really any innovations that they've been working on for the presidential hackathon period. And we've got many regulatory support like this, which is mostly what the startup people really need. Is a kind of friendly sandbox for them to prove their ideas, and a kind of scaling deeply with the relationships with the public servants in order to ensure that they're making a positive social impact. So I believe the impact amplification, impact investing, that's what is needed to do. And we're also working on newer designs from, I believe, the distributed ledger community, right? Quadratic voting. We've used that in presidential hackathon for quite a few years now. Now we're looking at quadratic funding. We're looking at many innovations that had its roots in the more startup scene in the distributed ledger community, but now we're incorporating them in our democratic governance as well. Hope that answered the question.
In terms of the Gold Card
Yes.
program, I believe one of the example is one of the founders of YouTube, and he's
Yes.
now based in Taiwan and like
Yes.
contributing to the entrepreneurial community.
Yes. Yes. Steve is very helpful. Yes. All right. Any follow-up questions or raising your hands? Otherwise, I'll just go back to Slido. All right. So people would like to know what would be the first step for a country to leverage digitalization. In Brazil, we do not have a digital minister. How's the role like, and how can we develop it? I've always said that the first steps are broadband as a human right, like running water, and then digital competence, not just literacy in basic education. These are the 2 kind of founding pillars. Without these 2, it's very easy to build a startup nation that leaves everyone else behind, and just a few people equipped with broadband and digital competence, and everybody else is just consumers. And it's a very unhealthy relationship for democracy to shape its society. So the way that we say competence means that people as early as primary school get to measure their air quality, participate in the distributed ledger, inform the kind of pollution-oriented demonstrations and referendas and so on. And since we're talking about Brazil, a lot of participatory budgeting and local level referenda are informed by the citizen scientists, again, as young as the primary and secondary school students. And by making a real difference, starting a petition to collect 5,000 signatures to say, let's ban plastic straws from bubble tea takeouts, and actually effecting that change, to see the change going through without having to go to a strike on Fridays. That is a very empowering thing for many high school students and for primary school students. And then they will invest more time to think about how to apply digitalization to the things that they care dearly about. And they are the digital natives. They are the people who are going to point out the direction for digitalization. And once they achieve this intergenerational solidarity, it means that the entire society supports them with the resources, instead of thinking that, oh, we're being excluded, we're being left behind, and things like that. So intergenerational solidarity based on digital competence in the capstone projects, in the university social responsibility project is one pillar. And then making sure that even if you're on the top of Taiwan, almost 4,000 meters high, you still are guaranteed 10 megabits per second for just 15 euros a month, unlimited data both ways. It's my fault otherwise. People do write email to me about their human rights violations in for example, quarantining places and so on, and I try my best to fix them. So the point is that once people understand and no one is being left behind, then digitalization really started to work. That's the network effect, that's the permissionless innovation and so on. But it must be built on a solid ground. Now, my role is one of the 9 seats in the cabinet as what we call ministers with a portfolio or at-large ministers. And there's also 32 other more vertical ministers, each with their own ministry or commission. And so the 9 at-large, or I call it horizontal ministers, works on interagency issues only. So my office is half civic tech people and half secondments from each ministry. So each ministry can only send 1 secondment. We have 32 ministries, and I currently have around a dozen or so. So historically, I think anywhere from 10 to 20 secondments to my office, and which means some ministries never send anyone, like the Ministry of Defense never sent anyone. I wonder why. So I know nothing about defense issues, but the more people-facing ministries did send people. So of culture, communication, education, interior, you name it. These are, of course, the usual suspects: law, finance, the ocean affairs, things like that. And the MOFA, the foreign affairs, did send people because they work on public diplomacy and really want more interaction with my Twitter account. So basically, I'm a public servant of the public service. I don't give the secondments orders. I don't take orders from them either. It's all by voluntary association. So the role that I do is just to hold this space. I call it the public digital innovation space. You can type in digitalminister.tw and see the space and its members, and then just make sure that whatever they raise on a Monday over lunch can be realized in a way that is comfortable with all the interagency stakes and interests and so on. So I'm more of a designer of a space for interaction without my own agenda to push. It's all very Taoist. I'm sure that the political reality in every jurisdiction is different, so I would not say that you must develop the road this way or that way, but I would say that digitalization is not just digitization, it's not just turning papers to bits. There's an awe in digitalization. It means that we must leave no one behind. All right, we're good. So next one. 7 people would like to know, while same-sex marriage is legalized in many countries, including Taiwan, many parents are still conservative. How could we communicate this to our parents? Well, if you by conservative, you mean respecting existing institutions like the temples and the church and family-to-family ceremonial marriage, I'm also conservative, right? I respect those institutions a lot, which is why, as I explained, we shaped the same-sex marriage so that it only guarantees the rights and duties of the individuals, not touching anything about the words Mandarin yin, which means family marriage. We don't even touch that word. We just say hun, which is a person-to-person marriage. And so I believe that this is really the way to communicate to our parents and grandparents. My grandma go to church every week, and then I make sure that I talk to her also every week, roughly the same time that she spends with her church friends. She's a devout Catholic. So I'm not trying to say that her Catholic friends there's anything wrong with their tradition. I respect them very much. But I'm trying to also share my own kind of personal, authentic experience with my grandma. And my grandma balances, she's almost 90 now, balances what she heard from both sides. And then most of the time come up with some good observation or innovation that basically take both sides or take all the sides. And I think I learned that from her because I always tell myself that if I don't understand certain generations, certain cultures, certain ethnicity of people, it's my problem. I need to spend more time with them so that I can also speak from their vantage point. And that's how I communicate with my parents and grandparents, mostly because they are also pretty Taoist people. I would recommend that to other people as well, to build intergenerational solidarity, to simply take all the sides. It's difficult at first, but like active listening, these nonviolent communication, open space technology, but these can be practiced. It's like playing a piano, and once you get a hold of the social technologies, makes it much more powerful when you very intently listen to someone's side of the story and then kind of continue their thoughts and say, yes, and we can actually innovate to leave no one behind. So that's my own experience anyway. All right. Anything else? 6 people would like to know, how have you dealt with internal resistance to change? As I said, I give no orders, take no orders. So it's very, to quote Buckminster Fuller, I believe, I'm not here to, so it's a paraphrase, I mean, not here to destroy or change existing institutions. I'm here to build new institutions or new mechanisms of collaboration that doesn't suffer from the existing issues. But those new things are organic, meaning that I'm not telling everyone to switch over. Everything that we produced during the pandemic for pandemic control are entirely voluntary. You don't have to scan a SMS QR code to finish contact tracing checking. You can always stamp or write your name, your way in. You don't have to go to a convenience store to pre-order your mask and so on. You can still buy it over the counter, even during the most scarce times of medical grade mask and so on. So basically all the innovations digitally is just one more option. It's just one more option. It's not there to take any choice away from people. And so in a sense, it's all incremental. And by saying it's all incremental, it's saving time for everyone, it's reducing risk for everyone. There's no internal resistance to speak of, because if people feel that it's actually reducing risk and saving time, by the way, you can't fudge these two, so you have to both reduce time and reduce risk, and then people just voluntarily start to use the new system. And according to Mr. Fuller, that's when the old institutions begin to turn obsolete. But it's not that I make those obsolete, it's just people are gradually finishing up, shifting to the new mode of relation and so on. So again, very Taoist. I'm not effecting change. I don't do impact, right? It's mostly just figuring some good ideas out and then make the good ideas worth spread. That's my main mode of action. So if that's okay, let's go on. An interesting question. 6 people would like to know, how could Asian values as represented by Taoism, Buddhism, and or Confucianism contribute to Western-minded capitalistic society for a more inclusive one? So stakeholder capitalism, right? I think it's quite clear that nowadays the Western-minded capitalistic society, it has changed also. It takes a definitely more, like even the Olympic motto, the faster, stronger, higher, changed to say together, right? So in the past couple of years, everything changed. It used to be cool to show off your social status on Instagram. Now it's very not cool during the pandemic. So a lot of the things that the consumer style capitalism that people take for granted and label it Western simply change its character during the past couple of years, and I think for the better. And so I don't think we need abstract Asian values or Taoist or Buddhist or Confucian teachers to effect that change. In fact, this global neighborhood is effecting its own change. Indeed, we're now facing closer to each other than ever before, and people who share the same common experiences measure their distance in shared values, not miles, right? Because it's hard to travel now. But we, as long as we kind of adjust our sleeping patterns a little bit, we literally are living in a neighborhood where the people in the world have some common experience to share with each other because of the common 2 years of the pandemic and also infodemic that we've been put through, right? So I think this is the key to getting a more inclusive society. People are seeing that there are limits to the entrepreneurship, capitalism, and so on, and that only when it's good for everyone, or at least measurably good for solving the issues at hand, can it win the support from the market. Otherwise, nowadays, if you say you're burning carbon and so on to make a profit, no bank will even lend you money very quickly. So again, the character has changed. So I'm sure that people who already practice Taoism, Buddhism, or Confucianism can find extra words to say in moments like this. But I don't think that the contribution is necessarily by those thoughts, but rather by the anecdotes and shared experiences that are now just making sense to our international counterparts, our international friends. And so just share more stories, I guess, instead of trying to convert people. It would be my main message. Yeah. All right, so 5 people would like to know, how do Taiwan plan to respond to new tech trends? Many of these are made in Taiwan, blockchain especially, because, some authoritarian regimes don't really like the idea of crypto. And so many of those cutting edge distributed ledger innovations are now made in Taiwan. I met with Vitalik a couple of times, and many of researchers in Ethereum Foundation are in Taiwan or are themselves Taiwanese. So there's a lot of blockchain and now rebranded VR, right? Web 3.0, shared reality, and metaverse. So I think in these ideas, what we're now seeing, especially around the Web 3, is essentially saying that Web 2 went too far and gave the system operators too much power. Back in Web 1, everyone runs our own websites, which doesn't scale, obviously. But on Web 2, everyone's homepage looks the same, and we relinquish control. And then Web 3 is kind of like, let's go back to the Web 1 ideas, but with better experience, like the Web 2 have proven to us. And I think it's a natural wish to go back there. And the same goes for metaverse. People sometimes look at metaverse and think it's shiny, it's cool, but for me, it's nostalgic. I think I read Snow Crash around 93, 94. And so for me, it's a very old term. It's as old as cyberspace. But in Mandarin, I guess, at that time, we didn't quite translate it. The previous translation was 美他语 or something, which didn't catch on. So we people say cyberspace in Taiwan, but not metaverse. But now when I see metaverse, I think of my teenage days and feel old. So again, I believe it's about restoring the power balance back to the 93, 94s, but with better human experience and including more people and broadband as human rights in the equation. So I think we'll just keep responding to it by making sure it's democratic and not democratic in the kind of diluted sense of this century, right, of just being accessible and cheap, but rather democratic in the previous century sense, which means that everyone can express their ideas in a way that's meaningful and participate in the governance and design mechanism that's fair to the next generation, not monopolizing from the first generation. That's what democratization used to mean in the last century, and now we're applying the same principles to those newfangled or sometimes nostalgic terms. And so, of course, the semiconductor industry is the thing that powers all this, right? Without the semiconductor improvements, none of this would be possible. And so I believe it will also lead to more dimensions of innovations, because the semiconductor industry are really good in pairing up with other thoughts like telehealth, telecare for one thing, like smart agriculture for another one, countering climate change and so on. All these, if it needs new measurements, new sensors, new data governance capabilities, edge computing, homomorphic encryption, privacy enhancing technologies. These are the kind of a task that the society asks the semiconductor innovators to deliver. And so far they've delivered quite well. So I think it's ultimately about bringing tech to the society, not asking society, especially a democratic one, to adapt to tech. That would be our way to respond to those new tech trends. Hope that answered the question. For other people would like to know, there are a few industries such as semiconductors, of course, where Taiwan is seen as a leader. Looking into the future, what are the growth areas that Taiwan can excel in? pretty much everything, I guess, because what we're now doing is essentially empowering innovators to, again, reduce their cost, to come up with new ideas, to disseminate their ideas in the digital space, and so on. So by design, the Taiwanese creative scene is very, very inclusive and very diverse. So it's not like the kind of top-down 6 core industries determine the career choice of Taiwanese people. They are chosen as core developments. The 6 core industries is because they have the most synergy. They are the bedrocks, the pillars on top of which those creativities can flourish. So far from it that I prescribe what are the few growth areas that Taiwan can excel in, but we want to make sure that we absorb the damage, the pain, the risk in the first few startups that you run, and maybe by the 4th, by the 5th, then you will contribute positively to the ecosystem. I mean, it took me like 4 startup attempts to really get anywhere, and I think that it's true for everyone. And so the job for the government is to kind of absorb, to cushion the risk, so that people can pivot more and also get more either crowdfunding or crowdsource support if your startup idea actually resonates with the society and solve a societal change. So we're almost at time.
Yeah, thank you,
raise a
Audrey.
hand or something?
I think so there are like still 18 questions remain, but
yeah, no way I'm going
to finish this. But I know you have a YouTube channel and you share a lot of information over there. So everyone, I encourage you to check out Audrey's channel in YouTube. But I think we still have like 4 minutes left. I know I invite you to like give some words to the whole INSEAD community, because this webinar is part of the INSEAD Taiwan Week event. So if you don't mind, would you like give some words to the whole INSEAD community?
Yeah, certainly. I would just, because the next questions ask about my work and the challenge and so on. So I'll just honor your votes and read my job description, which is about the challenges I face and how I plan to overcome it, if that's okay with you. And it goes like this. When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of Beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear that singularity is near, let's always remember the plurality is here. So that's my job description. And thank you for the great questions. Live long and prosper.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Audrey. And thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah, I know you have the very busy schedule, but thank you very much for joining us. And again, like I believe you are very satisfied with the Audrey's very inspiring but also insightful sharings. If you want to know more about like what she's thinking and what kind of like the most trending things is happening in Taiwan and in the digital minister, in the digital part of Taiwan, please go check YouTube on her channel. Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Live long and prosper,
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.